Hello everybody. Unit 3, which covers chapter 4 of the text, talks about switching constructs. And in the latest two editions of Java, there's been some pretty big changes to the switching constructs that the second edition textbook doesn't really get into, but our actual course module page on Canvas does talk about the differences between it. So I wanted to cover the three different versions that you might come across, and so you can understand what the difference between the old style switch versus the new style switch, and then what the difference is between a switch statement and a switch expression, which is down here. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and cut over to the code, and so I can walk you through the differences using this example right here, the zip code thing. So first, let's talk about the original switch statement, and this has existed since the dawn of time, or at least the very early versions of Java. And in this case, so the original problem was to prompt the user to enter a zip code, and then you'll return where it's at in the country based on the case. So here you can see our normal setup. We have our preamble. We're importing our scanner because we're going to be getting input from the user. And then of course we have our class name right here, public class, and I just called it original switch. Okay, of course we've got our main method, public static void main string args. Okay, and then we have the body of our main method right here. So this is just creating our scanner. This is setting up a temporary variable, creating our scanner to get user input right here. And this is how you do that. We'll talk about objects later in the next version of Java, or the next course of Java, CS 219. But for now, this is how you get user input, right? And of course, we issue a prompt to the user, say, hey, enter a zip code. So this part right here might look a little bit different to you because you haven't really come in encounter with this yet. But this is what's called method call chaining. So what we're doing here is we are getting our input, so we're calling in next line, which is getting the next line of input from the user, and then which is going to return a string because we called next line, right? And it tells you that this returns a string. Char at returns the character at that first position. So since this returns a string, we can call char at on this result, right? So this right here would be the same thing as if I would have gone, let's see, comment that out. I could say string input, right? And then we're going to give it nothing, and then we're going to say input equals in dot next line, right? And then we could say char, well, just call it input. No, we already used input. We can't do that. Call it char in. Okay. One of the things that's said is one of the most difficult things in any programming language is coming up with names for your variables, and that is no joke. It's the serious issue of how do you name things when they've got similar connotations, right? So we're getting a char, right? And so we're going to say char in is equal to input dot char at 0. Okay. So, as you can see, all of this right here is what I accomplished within one line. I don't have to use all these variables. I can just use the results of the method calls themselves. Okay, so that's why I do it like that. It just makes your code easier to read and much cleaner. All right. So, this is going to give us a character of either 0 through 9 or some other thing that we don't know how to handle. So in the old ways of doing things, we would have to list our cases out like this, right? And so it would say case 0, case 1, case 2, case 3. And then what this is called is called falling through, right? If I put in a 0, it's going to go to case 0, and it's going to say, well, there's nothing to do there. So I'm going to go down to case 1, nothing to do there. I'm going to go down to case 2, nothing there. Case 3, aha, I can do this thing right here. And then it's going to encounter the break, which is going to take it out of the loop. So when it hits this break, it's going to jump all the way down to this line down here. All right? And the same thing with 4, 5, and 6. If you put 4, 5, or 6 in, it's going to cascade through those cases until it encounters something to do, and it's going to keep doing that until it encounters a break. So if this break wasn't here, and I input 4, 5, or 6, it would set result equal to this right here, and then it would fall through to case 7, and then set it equal to this. So the break is what tells it to stop falling through to the next case, and that's why you need it on these old style, the original style switches. Right? Now you don't need one for the default case here because it automatically falls through to the end of the switch statement. Right? So basically, in a nutshell, if I enter 0 through 3, it's going to do this thing. If I enter 4, 5, 6, it's going to do this thing. 7, it'll do this. 8 or 9, it'll do this. And then if it's none of those, it will do the default case. All right, so let's take it for a test drive real quick just to show you that it works. Okay. Boom. Don't worry about any of this. This is old stuff. Right. So enter a zip code. I'm going to say 4530, my zip code. And it says zip is in the Central Plains area. Cool. All right. Let's run it again. Enter a zip code. Let's enter Bob. Okay. Invalid zip code. Cool. Now, naturally, I don't have this in a while loop to keep going, so I have to run it every time. But that's the original switch statement that's been around. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the new switch expression. Or excuse me, switch statement. So here we go. Here is the new switch statement. You can see here, switch statement, right? Switch statement. Now, what is the difference between this one and the old one? Well, if you look at it, it's a lot less code. Here I've got 26 lines of code from top to bottom. Here I've got 40 lines of code from top to bottom. Now, you could argue that you could also do this. You don't have to put these all in one line, but you do have to have the case every single time, right? So we could get rid of a couple lines of code by doing it like that. All right, but that's neither here nor there. What the biggest thing about the new style, let's go back to that, is this right here, okay? This case arrow replaces the colon that existed before, but it tells the compiler, hey, execute this thing right here, this statement, and then jump down to the bottom. Notice that we don't have any breaks in any of our code here because we're using this arrow. And this arrow is taken from, you see a lot of times in Lambda expressions, which I'm not going to go into, but basically it says, hey, if any of these cases are true, these case labels, then execute this thing and jump to the end. Notice that we only have one case per line. Right, let me go ahead and add some space here just to make it a little bit easier to see. Right, so this covers case 0, 1, 2, and 3. These are called case labels. So if it's 0, 1, 2, or 3, the result is going to be this, and then it'll exit the loop. No breaks are needed. It won't fall through. Okay, so it's much cleaner and easier to write and less prone to error. So that's fantastic. So that is the new switch statement as compared to the old switch statement, which has all this extra gobbledygook. You got to write case every time. You got to write break every time, right? Okay. So what is the difference now? Well, let's go ahead and run it just to show you. Okay. Enter zip code 45430. Okay. Central Plains area. Cool. It works. And we'll test the default case. Enter zip code. Dave. Okay. Invalid zip code. Okay. So that's showing you that the new switch statements work. Now, another point to note is that the new switch statements, these only work with Java 14. Okay, so if you're not using the latest Java compiler, you won't be able to use this right here. Okay, or excuse me, this format right here. You'll have to use this old style. All right, so now, what is the difference between a switch statement and a switch expression? Well, a switch expression allows you to return the results of a variable without having to store it in a temporary variable, right? So if you look at the original switch here, I said, hey, the result is equal to this, right? I have this variable called result, and I say zip is on the East Coast, and I set it every time, right? You see it here too. Result is equal to zip is on the East Coast. Notice that this is a full statement. Okay. In the expression, okay, we're in switch expression now. Notice my usage here. I have system.out println and I have switch embedded in it. okay, that implies that the switch expression is going to return the result of something. All right, it's going to give something to this print line function right here. All right, so to make this a little bit more obvious, in these previous things, I have the string result, right? So we can do this. We can say, well, I've got string result again, and now I want to say result is equal to all of this right here. Okay. And then I can say system.out.println result. Okay. Now, there's a couple things that you got to be aware of with this. Number one is that this right here is just an expression. It is returning something. It is not evaluating anything, right? There's no statements here that are being executed. This is, notice that this is just a single string literal, right? If I look at my switch statements previously, it's an actual statement. It has the result equals this, right? Okay. This is just purely something that can be the result of a state or an expression, right? It doesn't have to be a string. It could be an integer or some kind of calculation. All right. The other thing that I want to show you is this right here. So you can execute a bunch of statements, but if you are executing multiple statements, you have to use the yield keyword to return a result. So here I just have a bunch of gobbledygook just to show you that in the default case, I'm going to set x equal to 0, y equals to 1, and I'm going to print bananas plus x plus y. Okay? I don't know why, just because, right? But then I still yield invalid zip code. So if I get to my default case, it's going to execute all of this, and then it's going to return invalid zip code to result, which is then going to get printed out. So let's go ahead and take it for a test drive. Oh, got a syntax error. Let's go ahead and fix that. It says, syntax error, insert semicolon to complete Java statement at line 29. Well, it's saying that because we have to complete this statement right here, right? Normally with switch statements, they're kind of like while loops. You don't have to have a semicolon at the end of them. But here you do. All right? So it fixes that. And then this says it's a resource leak. That's optional. We can just say enter or in.close, right? Okay, so there you go. That's how you fix stuff. So we're going to run it. Okay, and then we're back to here. Enter zip code 45430, Central Plains area. Great. Run it again. And we're going to enter Karen, because everybody loves Karen, right? And you can see here, bananas 0, 1. Note here that it concatenated these two values together because we started with a string. So it said, oh, I'm going to add x to bananas, and then I'm going to go, oh, I'm going to add y to this, right? If we would have gone like this, it would have just printed out 1. All right, so let's make a liar out of me and run it again. Right, enter zip code. We'll say, I don't know, let's put in my name. Okay, notice there it just printed 1 instead of 0, 1. Okay, so that's a little nuance to concatenating strings and numbers right there that you need to be aware of. But everything works as intended, right? So this expression is returned from the switch statement, which gets stored in result, which then gets printed out here. Now again, I can also do it like this. I can get rid of this, right? And this is why my semicolon was missing before, is I can say, you know what, I don't need the string variable. I can get rid of that, and I can just dump the result of the switch statement directly into this print statement, right? But what I have to do is I have to close out the print statement with the parentheses and a semicolon. And so there you have it. All right. So a little bit more streamlined code. Again, if your code isn't have every single optimization, I'm not stressing it. What I want you guys to focus on is readability and correctness. I want you to make sure that your code actually works as intended, not worry about doing all of this. But I just wanted to show you different options on doing things, okay? And why my job is kind of difficult grading your homework, because everybody does things a little bit differently. So just enter another zip code, and there you can see that that zip code is on the East Coast. So there you have it. That's the difference between original switches, which have the cases and the breaks, okay? And it falls through, versus the new switch statements, which you have to have Java 14 in order to use, which allows us to execute statements, not an expression. So this would be a statement, right? Because it's actually doing something, where this is an expression. It just evaluates to something. In this case, it's just a string, okay? And then, of course, a switch expression, it returns a result, okay? Now, why don't we use the keyword return here? Well, the problem with that is return is used to exit a method, right? It says return to the call stack of the previous thing, right? And that's not what we are doing, because we don't want to exit the main method. So that's why Java engineers settled on the yield statement, which is kind of like, hey, we're going to give this back. It's kind of like a lower level return, right? We're not returning out of the method. We are just simply giving the result to this thing right here. All right. So hopefully I helped clear it up. If I made it more confusing, I'm sorry. Let me know if it helped or not. Otherwise, I'm going to assume it did. All right. So thanks, and I'll see you throughout the week. More comments.